Welcome in. This is Greater Boston Today, and I'm David O'Leary. Good morning. It is nice to have you tuned in. This morning, we're going to speak a little bit about mental illness. We're going to speak about suicide. We're going to speaking about mental illness and suicide. An organization called the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention has an upcoming walk to raise awareness and also to raise funds for the work that they do. But Craig A. Miller, who joins us this morning to talk about his work with the Department of Mental Health here in Massachusetts, and also a little bit about his story and his background. He's got a book called This Is How It Feels, a memoir of attempting suicide and finding life. Good morning and welcome. It's nice to see you, Craig.
Good morning. Thank you.
Yeah. Just tell us a little bit about your story. What brought you to your attempt, taking your life, but also making the decision to talk about it and talk about it so publicly with the Department of Public Health and joining us here this morning.
Yeah, so mental health issues was something that I had struggled with for a very long time, really early on with things that were undiagnosed, depression. I was a victim of bullying, different kinds of abuse and things like that without any sort of treatment. When I was a teenager, I began to get really affected with obsessive-compulsive disorder, depression, and anxiety. And I was hospitalized several times for it. In one case, one of the hospitals I went to determined that the rituals associated with the obsessive-compulsive disorder took up 95% of my waking hours. So I was really consumed in severe mental health issues for many years through my teenage life.
I'll ask, because you'd mentioned bullying.
Yeah.
In 2013, it seems like there's an awareness about bullying and the harm it can do, much higher sort of understanding of that now than even just a couple of years ago, where there might have been sort of, let kids be kids, they'll work it out themselves kind of thing. We don't know each other that well. You look like you're probably in your mid-20s, maybe a little bit older or something like that. But was there any sort of, when you were suffering with and undergoing bullying, was it a matter of, come on, just buck up and figure it out and deal with it, or was there more of that recent awareness of what was really going on?
No, it was a pretty much buck up and deal with it.
Yeah.
That was the neighborhood and the environment that I was in. There were times when I needed comfort. It was there in some sense. There was other times where I was just told that I had to learn to fight my own battles. And that is a really lonely place to be, especially when you're dealing with depression and anything else associated with mental health issues. You feel alone to begin with, but then to deal with bullying, to be directly outcast in a sense, to know that people talk about you, to know that people are thinking of you constantly is really painful, and it wears on you deeply. And I think it adds to that sense of alienation, especially when it comes to depression.
So you said that this would sort of manifest itself into some of these disorder behavior, and as you said, take up most of your day.
Yeah.
You'd be consumed with sort of some of this compulsive behavior. What were the behaviors like?
Well, they were very different from what you'd probably assume OCD to be. In a lot of situations, people think of, straightening things out.
Light switches.
Flicking light switches and things like that. It did start with stuff like that. And it actually went way earlier back into elementary school, where I would walk to school and I would think, if I keep my legs perfectly straight and if I avoid stepping on cracks on the sidewalk, then maybe I won't get picked on today. Maybe people won't talk about things today. And I think that sort of got the ball rolling with OCD. When it really started, it did start with light switches and things like that, what you'd see in the movies and what you kind of hear about. But I fought it. I fought it as hard as I could. And one of the most difficult things about OCD to deal with is that all along as these things are happening to you that it's not right. It makes no sense. These irrational thoughts and the fears associated with them are completely irrational, yet you are powerless to fight them. So I tried to fight, and I was pretty successful in the physical OCD rituals that I had.
Keeping it at bay.
Right, not touching things when I felt like I needed to, and fighting off that anxiety. What happened is it moved internal. So I ended up at a point later in my teens where this 95% of my time was primarily spent with rituals and behaviors associated with my thoughts. So I would think a thought, and I would have to reverse the way I came up with that thought. I would have to take it backwards. If I spoke to somebody, I felt in a sense that if I didn't say it quote unquote right, I would have to speak the words aloud in reverse. And I also had a counting thing where, you count. Counting is one of the symptoms of the categorized behaviors. But I would count the words I spoke in a conversation. I had to avoid multiples of 3. It was extremely complex.
And how old were you at this point?
15.
Okay. So in addition to everything else that's going on with quote unquote normal, 15-year-old behavior, where it's hormones are raging, you're growing, your body's changing, social stuff is changing, you've got this civil war going on inside as well. Wow.
Exactly.
So as you get a little bit older, the behavior continues, but it moves inside.
Yeah, it moved inside, and it became very, very heavy dealing with. I kept giving myself chances. Suicide, I think, was always on my mind. It was something I battled with for quite a long time, even before that, and it almost became a solution to my problems. It was the way I thought about it was, well, if tomorrow's harder than today, then that will be it. And then I almost used it in a sense to help me get to the next stage and to help me know that I could get somewhere because I had a quote-unquote option, as dangerous as that option was.
Was there any history in your family, any family history of mental illness or depression? And I ask more from a medical standpoint, but also from a support standpoint. Was there any sort of sense from the people who were around you that, this is like Uncle so-and-so or Auntie so-and-so, and sometimes there's some support and some help or understanding for your situation?
There's a couple things to that. One is there is some history of mental health issues in my family, but that wasn't brought up until much later. At the time that I was about 16, around the age of 16, I stopped coming home as often. I didn't run away. I didn't pack up and leave. I found a place that I felt a little safer at, and a little safer in terms of life. I felt that life wouldn't hurt me much more. I moved into a friend's garage, actually, which I wouldn't recommend to anybody. But I moved there, so I didn't have a lot of support from family and friends in that respect. They did what they could. There was times when my mother would bring me to support groups, and friends would try to help me when I needed help. But at the same time, during that time, when I was in that frame of mind, I looked at my issues and I thought, all I know about the culture we live in at that time, all I saw was the Cosby Show and the Brady Bunch, and
this ideal of,
support and love comes from family and friends, and that's where you get help. And it wasn't that my family and friends weren't trying to help me, it was that they weren't qualified to help me to the level that I needed it at. So to give them credit, despite the fact that they were trying to help me, I looked at it from a perspective that said, you know what, I can't help myself. How are you going to help me? And what you're trying to help me isn't working. And I really said, if my family and friends can't help me, then maybe nobody can help me. So when I went to therapy, I didn't give it a chance. I didn't let it do what it needed to do. The first person I met, I didn't like too well, and it kind of shut me down. I didn't consider that, it's a doctor. It's a stranger to begin with, and you don't develop a relationship like that in an hour-long session, and if the first person didn't work for me, maybe I should have given the next person a better chance. And because I had drawn those walls before I had even started, I think that really worked against me in dealing with my issues going forward.
The story has a happy ending, and it sort of brought you to, after your suicide attempt at age 20.
Yeah.
How did things kind of turn, and where did you sort of get the wherewithal, and sort of, when did it tip to, I'm going to tell my story? I'm not just going to survive my story, but I'm going to write it down, I'm going to put it in a book, and I'm going to start talking to people about it.
Exactly. So that's a great question. The first part being what changed me from being suicidal and in the grip of the mental illness that I was in to moving forward in life. That's the biggest question I get most often. What really changed me is, and I want to be clear when I say this, it is not my suicide attempt. Attempting suicide did not change me. I didn't wake up from 3 days in the ICU and feel guilty for what I did. I didn't feel ashamed for what I did. I wasn't even grateful to be alive.
Were you disappointed?
I wasn't disappointed. I think I was just kind of numb. I wish I had a better answer than that, but I was really numb. I felt like I had been picked up and put in a whole new world where I didn't even know my name. I didn't know what was around me. What was so profound to me about that entire experience sort of came later, and it was the realization that I had reached my absolute lowest point. And I had this sort of awakening in me that said, if I'm going to live the rest of my life, I cannot live it the way I've lived the first half of it. I cannot keep going this way. Mm-hmm. And so the anger I felt towards being sick and the fear I felt towards life really kind of didn't go away. Emotions that strong, I don't think, go away, but they transformed into desperation to get better.
To get better,
and determination to get better. So that anger became determination. The fear became desperation. What happens if I don't get better? Mm-hmm. That's what changed me. It was the realization that all I ever wanted was to be happy. Not happy with family, friends, relationships, not a good career, not money. I just wanted to wake up and be okay with it. Mm-hmm. I wanted to be able to go to sleep and look forward to the next day. Simple things. That realization is what changed me.
And you were able to kind of channel that, the anger into for good, for exactly. Using it to make yourself better. We have just a couple minutes left. I want to mention the book, which is called This Is How It Feels, and also the website is thisishowitfeels.com, where you can find out more about Craig's story and your work now. Speaking like this in front of who? In front of adults, kids, everybody in between?
Everybody in between, yeah. I've been asked quite a few times from quite a few different organizations to speak, from libraries, colleges, the state conference last year I spoke at, the Suicide Prevention Conference, right down to public events in churches. And I share my story, but what's most important about sharing my story is I don't share necessarily all the trauma that I went through. I try to focus on how I got out of it. Mm-hmm. The questions you've asked today, what helped me to move on. So I open it up to anybody who I think needs to listen and wants to listen.
Yeah. Well, and that's it, isn't it? I mean, even this conversation this morning, people may not know they need to listen or know they want to listen, but they hear something go, that sounds like me, or that sounds like somebody I know who could use help. So if you're listening this morning, we're hoping that we're reaching out to somebody, even if it's just one person who says, yeah, I know what you're feeling, and I experienced that same thing when I was 15 years or whatever,
right,
and would like to find out more. The American Foundation for Suicide Prevention hosts an annual walk. This year's walk will be Saturday, October 12th at Artesani Park. The organization is a national organization with a Boston chapter. You can find out more about the walk by going to afsp.org. You can find a little bit more about the Boston chapter, and you'll be joining the walk on Saturday, October 12th at Artesani Park.
Yeah, I'll be speaking briefly at the opening ceremony and signing, selling books, and meeting people and answering questions and saying hi.
Yeah, sharing your story. We're thankful for having you here to share it with us this morning. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, Craig A. Miller is our guest. This Is How It Feels is the book, Attempting Suicide and Finding Life. You can find out more online at thisishowitfeels.com. Good to have you with us. This is Greater Boston Today.